to the 2014 Littleton Public Library Summer Author Series, something we put together this year for the first time. In all, we have, I think there's 7 programs. This is the 3rd one. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the programs that are upcoming after tonight. The next program, which is 2 weeks from tonight, August 20th, will be featuring the book, the author Alan Boyd from St. John's Grave, who wrote the book Sustainable Compromise, which is an excellent book. Alan has written one book for me. He's a professor at Linden State College, English professor. He's written, I think, 7 or 8 books. But this is a really interesting book about his efforts, successful efforts to build a straw-baled house over in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. I think it's in Barnet, maybe, Barnet-Danville area. And it talks also about when he was a youngster, or a young man, I should say. He also lived in out in the New Mexico desert in a yurt at one point. So he talks about contrasting his lifestyle from 40 years ago with now, and the trials and tribulations of putting together a project like this here in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. It's a really great book. So if you can make it in 2 weeks, I think you'd really like his program. Also coming up in a few weeks, we have Art McGrath, former editor of the Courier. We'll be discussing his book, The Emperor's American, a historical novel. And after that, we have, who else do we have? Dan Sesney from Manchester, author of a new book, The Nepal Chronicles. Dan did, some of you may have been here last year, he did a program on his book, Adventures of Buffalo and Tough Cookie, which is a hiking memoir from here in the White Mountains. And there's another one in there someplace. I can't remember them all. Because I'll be doing one, the last program of the series, my book's White Mountains Hiking History and Stories from the White Mountains. And I'll be talking about historical pieces and basically the history of hiking in the White. So that one's coming up in October. We have sheets up here for afterwards if you'd like. Has the whole program scheduled, and please pick one up before you leave. Tonight's guest, of course, you're all here to see, is Veronica Francis. Veronica lives in Littleton. She's a New Jersey born, I believe, as I was. I don't like this. Veronica should be talking about her new book titled Circus Towne, which is a fun little memoir about growing up in a White Mountain tourist attraction, Twin Mountain. So I'll let Veronica take over from here.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
All right. Thanks, Mike, and thank you for inviting me to speak at the Littleton Library. Thanks, Jean, for hosting these. It's an honor to be considered an author at an author speaking night, so I can check that off as one of my goals I always wanted to do, so thank you. And as Mike said, I'm Veronica Francis, and I've lived here in Littleton for the last 12 years. I grew up in Twin Mountain, New Hampshire. And most of you might know me. I own a web marketing firm with my husband right down on West Main Street, Notchnet. So a lot of you know me from there. But I've always wanted to be a writer. I've written a diary about almost every day of my life since I was 12. So I have a lot of documentation. And I've always thought of writing a book, but there always needs to be a hook. There's got to be a story. I can't just print my diaries. I don't think my husband or my family would show up anymore. So I always look for ideas, or I've read other formats and how do you get this thing going, and big fan of Mike's in the local area. There's so much history. And one thing I did notice is that with all my family dinners and cocktail parties, the stories, I'd always tell stories about growing up and at Circus Towne, or even just at our house was a circus. So I'd tell these stories and people would say, those are funny, you should write those down. You should write a book. And hearing that a few times, I thought, well, maybe I should write a book and get it on paper, because I was blessed with a very funny childhood and this very unique experience of growing up in a tourist attraction and circus company. So I got my pen out a few years ago and started writing. And luckily I had a mentor, and a person who was important to the story, to verify the facts, is my mom. And Janice Francis is in the back of the room hiding, of course. She's one of those behind-the-scenes stage moms. But my mother is an avid reader. We grew up, she always was reading books. She's a big fan of the library. And Dean was just telling me how she's working her way through reading almost every book in the library. That's her goal, is she's going to keep getting. So she's an avid reader, and she encouraged me all the time to always write, and then she could verify these funny stories, because what I did was put together a book starting from the year we moved up here from New Jersey. My family was originally from New Jersey. And in 1972, my parents packed us up in a Winnebago and moved us up here to Twin Mountain, New Hampshire, and they bought a 10-room motel right on that strip there. If you've ever driven through Twin Mountain, there's lots of regular, those independent little 10-room motels. They bought a motel and 14 cottages and then a lot of land around it, like 40 acres all around it. It was just forest and then the motel. Pretty much just hikers really came to the motel at that time. There wasn't much to do. This is before any other attraction, really. Santa's Village was barely getting started. You know, Six Gun City wasn't around. So it was really just hikers, fishing, backwoods, snowmobiling, right? Twin Mountain was the snowmobile capital of the East. So there was a lot of snowmobilers around. But my family was used to coming up here because my mother summered. It was her grandfather, my great-grandfather, who originally found this area. He worked his way up in New York and New Jersey and owned his own brokerage firm on Wall Street. But he suffered from ragweed, had terrible allergies, asthma, and wanted to get away for the summers, get out of the city. So he and his wife traveled north and they looked around. They took the trains, landed pretty much near Maplewood and Bethlehem, and they rode their bikes Bethlehem and looked for land and looked for property around Bethlehem, and finally found a nice little knob called Beach Hill, which you've seen, Beach Hill Road, and he bought some land and purchased some land around there that already had a working farm, the Harrigan Farm. Margaret Harrigan's here too. It was your father's farm, right, Margaret? So my great-grandfather bought the place to make his summer home for his family, but also to have he started late in his 60s with a real hobby of roller skating. He studied ice skating and roller skating as his hobby, and what he found was he really liked the way ice skaters could dance and they could twirl, and the way their skates and their whole bodies moved with the twirling. You didn't see that on roller skating. Roller skating was pretty much just straight at the time and around the circle. So he, being an engineer or a curious man, he studied, he went to Europe, and he invented roller skating dancing. And so he won a lot of awards, and he was a writer himself, and he wrote a lot of books. He was Perry Rawson, and he published these. A few of these were published right in Bethlehem. There was a printing house there. You can see he wrote a lot more words. He really crammed it in. But this was The Art of the Skate Dancing by Perry Rawson. He's written, I think, a dozen of these little handbooks that were published, very popular with roller skating. And so he built a roller skating rink right there in Bethlehem, right on Margaret Ann's dairy farm, right? They put up a building. This is the old picture. It's still there. We all still roller skate. And my mother's, her cousins and all would come up every summer, spend the summer at the hill in their summer house, and then roller skate at least a couple times a day and perfect their roller skating dancing. So since we all summered here and roller skated, when the time came and my parents wanted to move us out of New Jersey and escape the city life, the riots, this was 1972, the Jersey Shore, so that's where they packed us up and moved down the street from where my grandfather's land was to Twin Mountain. So what I thought was interesting, though, was about my great-grandfather's books when I was finding them. I didn't even put the two together when I was publishing mine and putting mine together, was it ended up almost the same size. And all of his are like this size, and it worked for him, so my little book seems to be working that it came out the same size. So I'll pass those around, and there's the picture of the old roller skating rink. So we moved up here, and we had the motel, and like I said, Twin Mountain was a little dreary, not much going on, and what we found, what my father really wanted was an attraction, right? He really wanted to have something that got the tourists, give them something to do at night, because they are hiking, they are fishing during the day, they're hanging around the motel rooms. What can they do? So lo and behold, he ended up meeting another entrepreneur in Twin Mountain who owned a campground down the street, who had connections to carnivals and circus companies in Florida. And the two of them put their heads together, and we had the land right next door to the motel. So what they did was they came up with an attraction called Circus Towne. They built this 7,000 square foot building, cement block and all the awnings, built the building and the whole works to have the big tent out back. And they made a connection with a circus company right out of Sarasota, Florida, the full circus company with the elephants and the lions and the whole acrobats and the clowns to spend their summer in Twin Mountain. Because in Florida, right, you have lots of circus companies. It's very easy they love it down there in the winter, but they're all sort of hanging around, not many people in Florida in the summer. So they thought it was great to take 3 months off, come up here, have a steady gig of doing 3 shows a day, 7 days a week, and live in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So in 1973, my father and his partner opened up Circus Towne in Twin Mountain, and in June of that year, we had the whole circus company, about 25 performers total, plus their spouses, plus their animals, plus their helpers, all show up and live on the back land, because we had all that back land back there. So they just put their trailers and set up their cages and all their trucks and everything right on the land and lived there for the summer. And that was the start of one of the best summers of my life that I wrote about. So that's pretty much the crux of the story, because then we went on for the whole summer, and I broke the story down into a whole chapter, say, on clowns. Because you really had professional clowns. We had everything from Popcorn the Clown, who has gone on and stayed in the circus life ever since, to the world's tallest clown, who was Buck, who was, 7'6". 7'6", tall clown. The fun story that I always remember is when he did come up to visit us at our house now and then, and he would knock on our door, and there was a door like this with the window, and so when you go to answer the door, you look out and you're looking right at his belly button. That's how tall he was. It was like, oh, Buck's here, and then he would always have to duck wherever he went. So we had professional clowns that kept us entertained. I, of course, enjoyed the clowns. You learn a real art, right? It looks easy to fall down, to goof around, but really what the clowns teach you is that sometimes those goofy, easy, those moves that just look like they're being goofy are the hardest. It's very hard to fall, to trip just right, so they would teach me on their off hours of how to fall and how to juggle and do goofy things. My mother was the one who thought it was an exciting idea to dress me up in a clown suit and walk a pet pig on a leash around the park. So that was my summer job at Funtown with Circus Towne, was that I had to dress up and walk the pig on a leash. And we had the pig all summer, which was it was great to have as a pet, and people thought that was really funny until fall came, and then they had to sell the pig to the local restaurant, and then that turns out to be a sad story. So we move on from that one. But the animals really do make a circus. And I do a whole chapter on just the funny animals. And of course, the favorite ones I had and the biggest impact were the elephants. And before the elephants even got here, it was Mike Rice, who I found him on the internet just a few years ago, still being one of the top elephant trainers over the years, and they really respect him, and he took care of his elephants. As sad as it is to have elephants in circus, he did have just his couple elephants, and he treated them very nicely. But on their way here, he was driving them up, and this was a news clipping from the Boston Herald, June 14th, 1973. They had stopped in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts at a little motel off the highway on their way here, and he let the elephants out, and they were hanging around chained to his truck, where they broke loose, and they walked around Shrewsbury, Mass., and they had to call the police. They had the state troopers out flying around and driving around and looking for the elephants, and they brought them home safe. But that was before they even got here, and we already made the newspaper about the elephants. So the circus was coming to town. But the elephants, he did a whole elephant act, and I got some neat old pictures of his classic. These were his photo. There's his daughter, and he did have the elephants. He would give elephant rides right down the snowmobile trail. We had the snowmobile trail right next to Circus Towne, and he, for 50 cents, he would let you hang right on, and there's no saddle, hang on to the ears, and he'd run you as fast as that elephant wanted to run at the time, up and down the snowmobile trail, which is an experience you never forget of riding an elephant in Twin Mountain on a snowmobile trail. So that was a funny part about the elephants. We did have a leopard for another animal. They did have an African spotted leopard that would jump through hoops. They kept that one, they took care of that leopard. Here he is jumping through his flame. These were Heinz and Patty. They were a nice couple who were a perfect showbiz circus couple. Heinz, he had the leopard act. He was also a ventriloquist. He was the juggler. She did foot juggling, which if you lie down on your back, and she had a neat little kind of chair, and she'd juggle anything with her feet. And she was, yeah, they'd throw things at her. She could juggle anything with her feet. I tried that. It sounds a lot easier than it really is. But Heinz and Patty, and then they also had they were magicians. They did a cool magic trick too with a box trick. But the leopard was their big act, and they went on and worked in circuses, and he went on to be the manager of the company, and they were at it for years. So that was neat to have the leopard right there. So for animals, though, we did have some experiences with the monkeys. We did have a live chimp, and the chimp was not happy. He did not like being in a cage. He did not like being in the circus, and his owner was not very nice and really kind of kept him under a tight leash. He'd shoot off a gun whenever that monkey would start screaming and jumping around. So it was always a racket around the chimp. We stood away from the chimp truck. He would come out and perform, but he was very ugly once he got back to his truck. So one funny story about Main Street, Littleton, was, of course, we're out in Twin, which is 20 minutes away from Littleton, and we'd come to town once a week and do our grocery shopping. So my mother and I were on Main Street, Littleton, shopping, and all of a sudden we hear this racket, something screaming in the back of a kind of like an ice cream truck, and the truck's rattling and the screaming, and we're like, oh, Mr. Tandy must be doing his shopping, because there was the chimp screaming while he was driving to the grocery store with his chimp screaming all the way through Littleton. So that was the one time I remember him taking him out of town, because that was about it. After that, we're like, I don't think you should bring the chimp to Littleton. So the animals were always exciting. I've got lots of stories about animals in the book. The acrobats, there really was just an old big tent, big tent out back. The trapeze artists at the time, we really just had a tightrope walker. We're talking just beams that guys just put up from town, a big top, put the wire up, and then they'd just walk up it. No real nets, they'd hook themselves with something or have some little nets. But this time we're talking, 73. It wasn't OSHA or anything. You could just practice all the time. And when I think back on it, it's like, wow, they really were risking their lives all the time for these acts. Lashona was a Mexican trapeze artist. She was actually born in a trunk in the circus, the whole story, with relatives all the time. And her famous act was on the trapeze. She would sit on a chair on just the two legs and swing back and forth, just hanging on. And what's really amazing is she didn't have a net. All she had was her husband underneath, running back and forth as she did that trick, ready to catch her. And that's what his job was, 3 times a day, 7 days a week, to make sure that his wife did not fall down and he would catch her. I never saw her fall. She never fell, but he literally did run back and forth. So the trapeze, she really lived up to her name of being Lashona. Her other trick, when her husband wasn't running around, her other trick was pretty funny, is that she would dress up as this gorilla tamer in her crazy bikini, jungle bikini suit. Her husband would dress up as the gorilla, and her son would dress up as the little gorilla, and they would come out and do a whole real live act. She's whipping him and telling him what to do, and the audience always thought that gorilla was real. For a little while, until he actually started running out into the audience, and he'd tickle ladies, and then they always have a plant. One of my mother's friends would sit there with a pocketbook, looking very like she doesn't know anyone, all quiet. And of course, he'd come and grab the pocketbook and start going through it and pulling out embarrassing items out of her pocketbook. And she'd scream, and then they'd realize that it's not a real gorilla. But he really took pride in that gorilla suit. He worked hard to find just the right hair to make it look real. He was questioning all my mother's friends about their fur coats and fur, whatever they're wearing, to find just the right texture to make sure it looked real. So he did look like quite the real gorilla, and that was the Congo, the Amazing Gorilla Act, which he did. He used to pick on me. I loved it when he could be. There's a good picture of me being attacked by the gorilla in the circus, because he usually would pick on a kid. And of course, I was always the plant. Whenever they needed anyone in the audience to, oh, Ronnie, you want to be the clown today? I was right there. Or, oh, you want to be where the gorilla comes and gets you? Oh, okay, that was. I thought it was great, so I was always up for whatever, because you can tell I'm so shy, and I did not really. That's where I got my start. My start was there.
How old were you at the time?
I was 8 when they first showed up. So I was 8, 9, and 10. It was 3 years. So it is a perfect age to be at the circus. And they did put me to work, though. They put my sister to work first year of doing the spotlight. And run the spotlight for three shows a day, 7 days a week. Run the spotlight. And you really have to watch not to point it in people's eyes and when to flick the colors. And they paid, what did they pay you, Valerie? Big $5 a week? Yes. And we thought it was great, and here we were, but we watched the show. That's why I knew it all by heart, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. And I knew it so much by heart that one night they were having a party at my parents' house. It was my father's birthday party, and all the circus people came, and they were having a great time, and drinks were flowing, and pies were smashing in faces, and it was classic circus party. And all of a sudden the ventriloquist says, oh, Ronnie, come down here. So what we ended up doing was doing his whole ventriloquist act, where I sat on his lap and was the dummy. He was the ventriloquist, and sadly, I knew all the words. He did not even have to mouth them. I could fill in all the parts from watching it from all summer long. So that was a great party trick that he liked to do after that, and I didn't mind being the dummy in the ventriloquist act. So that was the start of it. So the circus went on. It was a powerhouse year, that 73, 74. We had similar. There were some acts that didn't come, some acts that swapped out, but it was popular. By 70, what are we, 73, 74, 75, circuses were starting to go a little out of style. The culture was changing. Saturday Night Live, it was the first year Saturday Night Live was ever premiering. You can kind of get a feel that old-fashioned circus going to a show was starting to fall away. So what we did have a medicine show that summer. The circus company had moved on, and they didn't have quite the right staff. So we tried the medicine show, which was really weird. It was just a bunch of weird guys, and I remember they would make concoctions and blow them up and laugh, and I just remember sitting out there with 5 people in the audience, this is not going to work. And luckily, my father was always one to, he's an entrepreneur at heart. He could see, oh, we got to try something new. This isn't working, let's move on. So in 76, what happened was we switched it from Circus Towne, we changed the whole name, and we turned it into Fun Town and made it more of a family fun attraction. And what he did was he turned the back lot where the circus performers were, we started a roller skating rink, taking after our roller skating heritage. And we put go-karts in the front. Those were before helmets, and when you could just put bales of hay at the edge of a fence and let guys go crazy on their go-karts as fast as they can. There's a lot of guys who remember the go-karts, a lot of guys who still have scars from those go-karts. When I wrote the book, I got a lot of funny emails about guys who still remember. They liked the go-karts the best. They were very popular. You probably remember the go-karts. Yeah. So the go-karts were popular. And then that following year, to build on that, we put in the bowling alley, because we had this big, huge building. We did, when Circus Towne was in its prime, we had a gift shop that was huge of Circus Towne memorabilia. We've got Circus Towne ashtrays still. We have Circus Towne patches. We have those little, the water's out of this one, but we had lots of Circus Towne souvenirs, a whole building full. So we had a gift shop, but we also had a unique museum. There was a gentleman from out west who carved out a whole miniature circus the size of a bowling alley. If you can picture the bowling alley size, full of a big table, and he carved miniature everything. The tent, the little people, the animals, the carts, did it all with a pocket knife. He had carved this thing for years, and he had it at a museum out west, and was looking for a home for it for a while. So that did come to Circus Towne during the circus years. It was all on display. So we really had a neat circus museum those few years. But when they took all the circus stuff, we kind of got out of circus and went over to Funtown, we needed something. So that's when bowling came in, because bowling was popular in the 80s. And we all learned how to bowl. My family, right, we can all bowl, and we can guess shoe sizes. I can know what your shoe size is by just looking at you. Working in a bowling alley. Of course, with bowling alley, you really need a bar. So that's the years that we put in a bar that went with bowling, and that's where beer and bowling, and I did a whole chapter on that time, which I skipped over a lot of stories from the bar in Funtown, which then I really wouldn't have any friends to talk to after that. I did this talk out in Twin Mountain, and a few guys were worried about my next book, if I write a book about Funtown, and I could tell more stories. But so we had the Circus Towne for a few years. We switched it over, just keeping up with the times. The bowling alley went strong right through the 80s and the 90s, pretty much right up until 10 years ago. We had many different types of businesses came along. My father tried batting cages. A lot of people bring your baseball teams, or remember the batting cages? Those could be a little scary on a wet day when the arm didn't quite work and the ball would be coming flying at you. That was always iffy. We had an ice cream stand that was very popular, Jesse's Ice Cream. So a lot of people, and I forgot, I didn't even mention Jesse's Ice Cream, so I said, oh, a lot of people remembered it fondly at Funtown at Circus Towne, so I thought if I do a reissue, I'll make a chapter just on the Jesse's Ice Cream and how bad the mosquitoes were in front of Jesse's Ice Cream. That it was a cute little booth, and you go up to the window and order, and my mother would be in there scooping ice cream for everyone, and they'd order, and just an army of mosquitoes hung around, so they'd all be standing there like this, ordering and then trying to eat their cones, and that was the entertainment for us. But there are a lot of stories just around ice cream. And then we got into golf. We had miniature golf and the driving range that went with it all. So we kind of switched it over into a family attraction, and that's what it's been right up until my father worked there right till the day he died in 2007, and we kept it open for a year or two, and now it's closed. We sold it. If you drive by, it's just this boring looking building. You can almost blink and you wouldn't see it. But it is right near all the other motels right on the main street. Same with the motel. The motel now is turned into little stores and offices. So it looks a lot different. But at the time, if you think of Twin Mountain, it's so different because this was 1973, 75. All those motels were full. There was about, at least I counted up, we had almost 6 bars in town. Betty might remember that you could have you could easily go. Betty was a local bartender at a few of those bars, right? But I think at 6 at a time, just on that strip where you only have 400 people who live in the town, but with all the tourists, and we counted up, I think you counted up over 200 motel rooms at that time were available to rent. And now they're down to there's only a few motels. So it really, and you figure all those people staying there, it would double the size of the population, and then they're all just walking up and down the strip too. So it really was more of a tourist destination, a lot of people walking, a lot more to do than there is today. And then we've been watching it change and grow, and that's sort of what I ended up with the book. So that's where I sort of took it, I took it from all those different aspects of Circus Towne, and then how the culture changed, how entertainment changed, and how Twin Mountain has changed over the years. And I, of course, got into technology, and one of the features of the Funtown and Circus Towne was the arcade. And we did start with pinball back in the 70s, the first pinball machines. And then we had a vendor who he would bring us, lease us for the summer, all the hot new at the time, pinball machines, but we were the first one in the North Country to get the first video game of Space Invaders. And I remember the day they showed up that summer with the Space Invaders game, that all it was really boring, right? Little blobs coming down on the screen, and you had one button, but it was just amazing. First time you could ever see a score on a video game, and it would stay on the display. You could have high score. I spent a lot of summer playing that Space Invaders game. But a funny story about the arcade was we did have a game called Asteroids. And you only had one button, and you got a little missile, and you shot off at the asteroids. There was a glitch with the first time that game came out, that if you were really good at it, you could keep building up enough points to keep playing for as long as you wanted to keep playing for. So we had this young kid, he was in high school from Whitefield. He started coming in and sitting there and playing for hours. And he'd keep getting higher and higher. He'd keep going for hours, but then time would come and we'd have to close. And we'd say, we have to close, Mike. He'd be all depressed and have to give up his game and go home. So one day he's there and he's really doing great. It's getting to be closing time. My parents wanted to close, but he did have hours of stuff left, and he wanted to go for the world's record. He wanted to play the game for 24 hours. So my parents left myself and my friends there to watch him to make sure, and they went home. And Mike proceeded to just play. He only ran to the bathroom like once or twice, and he'd only lose 1 or 2 spaceships because he had so many. By 6 or 7 in the morning, he had ended up playing 23 hours and so many minutes. He almost made it. There was no world's record out there at the time because there really wasn't that many video games. But we got on we called up their local radio station, WLTN, and they did a remote on the phone with us, and it was very exciting to see that he was going to win this big award. And then he finally ended up just getting so tired by the next morning. He played till about 9 or 10 o'clock and gave up and and went home to bed. But what's really weird is that I never saw him again, right? He was in high school with me. We graduated. I knew he was in the area. Never really knew what he was doing, nothing. So the day I self-published the book, and I had ordered my final copies, and I'm waiting from the UPS to bring the book in, and all of a sudden the UPS driver comes up, and it's not my usual guy, it's a different guy. He brings the books in, and he said, oh, yeah, didn't your father used to own Funtown? I'm like, yes. And I was like, yeah, and he's like, oh, I'm Mike Kilby. I'm like, what? You're the video guy. You broke the record. I was like, I wrote a whole chapter about you. And of course he was like, and I said, then you're bringing the books, which was so weird. It was my first delivery. He delivered it. So I had to open it up and give him one. And he did read it. And I have seen him delivering since. So he is around. But I thought that was a very odd story for my first delivery. So on that note, I did just self-publish the book. I've never written a book before. It's my first attempt. I don't, just even be considered with the professional authors. I'm not quite there, but I'll keep working on it. But it is a lot of fun to self-publish and to put the pictures in and to lay it all out. I was going to just shoot for being a Kindle single. That was what I really wanted to be, a digital, and a Kindle single is supposed to be a nice short book. It's supposed to be under 40,000 words. So once I saw that as an option, that was what my goal was. I wanted to have a quick, easy read that you could read on an airplane ride or as a single. I submitted it to the Kindle Single program, didn't make it because they're getting flooded with Kindle Singles like mad. And then a lot of people around here don't even have a Kindle, like my mother wouldn't have been able to read it. So I had to do a printed copy, and she doesn't have a Kindle. So that's when I got it into printed form. And I had to call up friends in Twin Mountain to dig out these pictures, because my family, for some reason, didn't take a lot of pictures, and we didn't keep them. But luckily, the McGees and the Monahans and all those families out in Twin pulled out photos that really helped me put it together in the book. So it was a lot of fun to put together. And I think I'll end on that note if anyone has any questions or...